Okay, now we are live now. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to our conversation on Pakistan's economy today. As many other countries, Pakistan too faces additional challenges due to Russian war against Ukraine and its ramification. This is gaining particular significance since Pakistan is holding talks with the International Monetary Fund, which will have impacts on the China-Pakistan corridor and brief CPEC, the country's largest development project. To discuss these issues, it's a great honor to welcome our two distinguished speakers, Professor Ashfaque H, who will join us hopefully soon, and Dr. Wolfgang-Peter Zingel. Both are, without question, leading experts in the field when it comes to Pakistan's economy. I will then start to introduce, perhaps my original idea was to start with Professor H and then continue with Dr. Zingel. But since it seems that Professor H is still on its way, we might just start with introducing Dr. Zingel. Dr. Zingel is a long-time associate of me. We shared actually more or less door-to-door the same offices at Heidelberg University, where he's an associate member. He studied economics, history, and law, and worked in the fields of agricultural, applied development, regional, and urban economics, with a focus on South Asian countries, especially Pakistan. He served as a representative for the South Asia Institute in Islamabad. Additionally, he taught at the National Institute of Pakistan Studies of Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad. He was a visiting fellow at the Institute of Strategic Studies in Islamabad too. Dr. Zingel published widely on South Asian affairs, including China-Pakistan relation, among many other issues. As such, I would like then to give Dr. Zingel the words to start our conversation today and present your views on the current first, which we have with Pakistan financial situation, and in particular with focus on CPEC, IMF. So please.
Yeah, Dr. Wolf, thank you very much indeed. As you heard, we know each other since a long time, and Pakistan I know even a little longer.
Yeah.
Because by a sheer coincidence, I joined the Institute at the very moment when the breakup of Pakistan was on the horizon. So because of that, I was concerned with the country for quite some time and tried to follow events. And later, when I was in Islamabad, I had the great fortune to meet Dr. Ashfaque H, who hopefully comes in a second. We already talked to his assistant, and one can see his desk. So I think immediately when he comes, he shall take over, because actually I was prepared to react what he would be saying. So not to preempt that, maybe I say a few words on the general situation in Pakistan, for those who are not concerned with Pakistan so much. Pakistan, as you might know, has an uneasy past. Yeah. And there he is. Good morning, sir.
Oh, Peter, how are you? Good to see you.
Good morning.
You just saved me.
Oh. No. I was having lunch.
We just started with the introduction of Dr. Zingel, since we're sharing a long common history in the South Asia Institute.
I think, let me tell you, I have an even more longer history than you.
Yes. Yeah.
We know each other since 1980.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we have a relationship of over 42 years.
Yeah. Happy to see you.
We shared a house.
Yeah. And as I say, you saved me because we just thought until you're coming, I bridge over the time, but I was prepared to react.
Yeah, the basic idea is
thing, so that I will not do, and I'm very happy to see you. And for those who don't know, I mean, Dr. Ashfaque is certainly one of the best economists that the country has. Not always on the same lines as the government, which most probably is even an honor to say. And we will be very eager to hear what you have to say. Please.
Okay.
Professor Khan, please allow me to introduce yourself. Just a few words, because because that all the audience know. I mean, Dr. Zingel knows you very well. I also study USAV, and I think we also met once at NAST. I was for 1 or 2 weeks visiting a researcher at your prestigious institute, university. But for our auditorium, Professor Ashfaque Hassan Khan is currently the principal of School of Social Science and Humanities, National University of Science and Technology, or just briefly NAST, in Islamabad, as well as the Director General of the Institute of Policy Studies, a think tank based at NAST. He has been the member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, as well as member of the Macroeconomic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. He has also been the member of the Senate of the National Defense University in Islamabad, appointed by the President of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The Higher Education Commission has appointed him as member of the Senate of the Pakistan Institute of Development Economic, Islamabad. These are just few positions he holds. He has much more, but I want immediately to pass over the words to Professor Khan, that he starts his presentation and share his much valuable insights on Pakistan's economy with a major focus on IMF. I'm pleased to have you on board for our conversation today.
So thank you very much, Professor, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on very important topic, which is IMF and Pakistan. I have prepared a very brief presentation, just so that I remain exactly what I want to tell your audience about Pakistan's relations with the IMF, historical relations with the IMF, and how is the current program going on, whether Pakistan has benefited from the IMF or it has not benefited from the IMF. I will present that to you, and then I will also say something about the current negotiation which is going on for the interest of your people, and then I will end up with some concluding remarks. So this is basically the agenda item. Oh, so you are handling from the... Okay. So this is what I intend to present about the IMF. And when I say IMF, I will briefly touch upon new liberal economic order, because I have some thoughts on this. And then I will also mention Washington consensus. And then I will discuss Pakistan-IMF relations and the current IMF program, how it has damaged the economy. And this is very important, how it has damaged the economy, how is ongoing negotiation with the IMF staff is going on. And then will there be another IMF program, 23rd IMF program, starting from October of this year until for 3 years, that is September 2025. And then concluding remarks. Next. Okay. As we all know about the IMF, that after the Second World War, when Europe was totally devastated and the world witnessed the breakdown of international monetary cooperation or international financial system, President Roosevelt at that time, when he was the President of the United States, he held a conference, and this was a 3 weeks long conference. And now I realize that people had plenty of time at that time. Plenty of time. For 3 weeks, they were sitting in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in the United States, and there were representatives from 44 countries who participated. And the main person behind this conference was basically the John Maynard Keynes. We all know as a macroeconomist. He was a British Treasury officer, and Harry Dexter White, and he was also a senior Treasury officer from the United States. So it was basically the work of the two Ministry of Finance or Treasury Office. And one of them was John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist that the world has seen in 20th century. Therefore, after 3 weeks of deliberation, two institutions were established. One was the IMF, and which was formally established on December 27, 1945, with only 29 member countries. And today it has 189 member countries. And it is playing a central role in the management of balance of payment difficulties of the member countries. Next. These are the two gentlemen. For those who have never seen, John Maynard Keynes is standing on the right side, a bit taller, and on the left-hand side is Harry Dexter White from U.S. Treasury, looking a little bit short and looking towards John Maynard Keynes. Next. The role of the IMF is basically that whenever a country faces serious balance of payment crisis, they go to the lender of the last resort, which is the IMF, for balance of payment support. And IMF then performs three functions: surveillance, and the word surveillance came after 1973 oil shocks after the Arab-Israeli war in October 1973, when many countries went to the IMF for balance of payment support. Here the word came surveillance, which is involving monitoring of economic and financial development and provide policy advice. They also do lending to member countries to address the balance of payment crisis, and they also provide technical assistance in terms of research or improving the data and so on. World Bank provides assistance to member countries for developmental activities, which is education, health, poverty alleviation. So the job of the two institutions are totally different. One deals with developmental activities in developing countries, and the other deals with the balance of payment crisis. But the main focus will be on the IMF. Next. What type of policies IMF pursues and how it affects member countries' economy? Now, and this is a common question people will be asking, that what are the policies and how they affect the member countries' economy? Now, to answer this question, we have to understand the philosophy behind the IMF. And is this policy meant to improve the member countries' economy or to weaken the economy? And I will leave to the people to decide. IMF policies are based on the intellectual foundation of new liberal economic order or new liberal economic thoughts, So therefore, the natural question is that I will list the new liberal economic thoughts or new liberal economic order. Next. These are the new liberal economic order or new liberal economic thoughts that deals with economic liberalization, privatization, deregulation, free market, increasing role of private sector, that is, it should be a private sector led economic growth or development, reducing the size of the government, that means austerity or cut in government expenditure, particularly eliminate subsidies and remove price control, leave it everything to the market. And also it promotes globalization, that is, the country should produce for the rest of the world and not only for their own limited market. Another important thing is the monetary policy is more powerful than the fiscal policy. And if you recall, in 1960s, particularly late 1960s, in the United States, particularly Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, they conducted a lot of research on the effectiveness of monetary policy versus fiscal policy, which instruments is more powerful to stabilize a country's economy. But it was a very long ago. But now we were all told that monetary policy is more effective than the fiscal policy, and that is why the IMF will always emphasize an independent central bank, even for a developing country like Pakistan. Why? Because the central bank governor is the member, by default, is the member of the board of governor of the IMF. So an independent central bank will derive a lot of advice from the institution in which the person is a member of the board of governor. Next. Neo-Liberalism is commonly associated with laissez-faire policies, means no government intervention in the market and let the market determine the price level on the basis of demand and supply, be it exchange rate, be it prices or whatever, leave it everything to the market. And there are two prominent schools of thoughts behind this on neoliberalism. One is known as Austrian school, led by Friedrich Hayek, which the European take cue from Austrian school, and the other is Chicago school, led by Milton Friedman. The intellectual powerhouse of neoliberalism derives from the 19th century classical economist, which believes in laissez-faire. But after 1980s, the term neoliberalism became indelibly linked with Chicago school. Means either you talk about neoliberalism or you talk about Chicago school and vice versa. They are two things, two of the same things. Next. Let me come back briefly to describe Washington Consensus. After 1973 oil shock, when Arab-Israeli war and then Arab imposed oil embargo to all those countries who were supporting Israel, the oil prices went up in the international market by 5 times, over 5 times. And the oil bill of many developing countries just shot up, and many countries faced serious balance of payment crisis. They all went to the IMF. So the first shock came in 1973, and then the second oil shock came in 1979 in developing countries, and they faced serious balance of payment difficulties and accumulated huge debt. Therefore, these countries went to the IMF for balance of payment support. Now, during that time, the United States Treasury, World Bank, and the IMF, they're all located in 1 kilometer radius in Washington, D.C. They all sat down that so many countries have come up for balance of payment support. So what should we be doing? So they came up with 4 policies, and that I will show to you some policies how to address the balance of payment crisis of the crisis of the developing countries. Now, in 1989, John Williamson, who is a British economist working at that time in the World Bank, he coined the term Washington Consensus. He coined the term Washington Consensus. Basically, the consensus among the 3 institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and the United States Treasury. And when he coined the word Washington Consensus, he had in his mind Latin American experience. It was a Latin American type of crisis which he had in his mind, and he thought that this is the way to address Latin American crisis. And he coined the word Washington Consensus. But over the years, this Washington Consensus, which were meant for Latin American countries, became a general tool for rest of the world. And when I say rest of the world, means rest of the developing countries, whether be it in South Asia, Central Asia, or Latin America, or wherever. So that is why this is known as one shoe fit for all. One shoe fit for all. And that is one of the major drawback of this Washington Consensus, because this consensus was meant for Latin America, but it was later generalized to everybody around the world, particularly in developing countries. And the structure of the economies of Latin America and South Asia, or whichever other part of the world, they may be different. So one shoe will never fit for all. So this point to be noted. Next, this is what these set of policies are described under the 3 elements. This Washington Consensus means growth, creating economic stability. That is why this is known as the stabilization program. First, create stability, then promote trade and liberalize exchange rate regime, and leave everything to the market. There is very little role of the government. I don't know what were the assumption behind this, that market in every developing countries work exactly the way as it works in developed societies, which is totally different. Totally different. Now, when we say creating economic stability, means how to control inflation and how to reduce budget deficit. Then the policy instrument is how to control inflation by raising discount rate, interest rate. How to reduce budget deficit, mobilize more revenue and cut down your expenditure. On the trade and policies, liberalize the trade regime and devalue the currency. And when we say devalue the currency, means market-based exchange rate. Leave everything to the market, as if the financial market of any developing countries like Bangladesh or Pakistan or any other countries are exactly the same as in Germany or in Belgium or in UK or in France, Italy or United States. Certainly it is not. Similarly, on the third element is market forces to operate freely, means remove subsidies and state controls, leave everything to the market and privatization. These are the 8 elements or 10 elements of Washington Consensus, which can be summed up in 4 policies. Next. These are the 4 policies. Tight monetary policy, raising interest rate, or we call discount rate. Tight fiscal policy, means austerity and that includes raising revenue and cutting down expenditure. Market-based exchange rate means devaluation and raising utility prices, gas prices, and electricity prices. I don't know how a country's economy can improve with raising gas prices and electricity prices, because this will increase the cost of production. And the country cannot compete in international market. For that, you require devalue your currency to compete in international market. When you devalue your currency, and I will come to that point later on, there is a serious drawback in these four policies, and this is basically IMF basically implements Washington consensus, because the consensus was between IMF, the World Bank, and the United States Treasury, and these consensus on these four policies. So this is the main element of the IMF. Whether any country like Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, or whosoever apply for IMF assistance, they will have to go through these four policies. Whether it is Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka, or any other country, they will have to go to these four policies. And that is why we call one shoe fit for all. Next. Let me come back to Pakistan's relationship now. Having described the neoliberal order, Washington consensus, and consensus implemented by IMF through the structural adjustment program, let me come to Pakistan and IMF relation. Pakistan became the member of the IMF in 1950, after 3 years of its independence. Pakistan's relation with the IMF in terms of seeking financial assistance started in December 8, 1958, when President Ayub Khan was the president of Pakistan. So first time in 1958, we sought assistance from the IMF for 25 million SDRs. But this amount was never disbursed. Pakistan did not withdraw this amount, although it was approved, but Pakistan did not withdraw this amount. Pakistan then second time went on March 16, 1965 and received financial support of $37.5 million. And 3 years later, on October 17, 1968, Pakistan went to the IMF for the third time and received $75 million. Next. Next. Yes. After the separation of eastern wing of the country, now it is Bangladesh, in 1971, Pakistan faced serious difficulties and went to the IMF and received $84 million in 1972. Then again sought assistance of $75 million in 73, another $75 million in 74 for balance of payment support. And this was post-1973 oil crisis, because as I stated, many countries faced problem. They all went to the IMF. So Pakistan also went to the IMF for this purpose. Pakistan received another standby arrangement of $80 million in 77, $349 in 1980, and Pakistan received another $730 million when Pakistan was a partner of the United States in the Cold War against the Soviet Union in 1980s. This was Soviet Union invasion in Afghanistan, and Pakistan became partner with the United States, and therefore IMF was very generous and gave $730 million in that year. Then came, now the important point to note here is, until the one which I explained to you prior to 1988, there has never been a review of the IMF program. there was no such thing as the mission member are coming every quarter and reviewing the performance and also giving advice that or impose the conditions of the IMF. The conditionality part came into existence after 1988. This is important point to note that until 1980, which I have listed here, Pakistan have never implemented any conditions of the IMF. They just provided financial support to address the balance of payment crisis, and that's it. There was no review, no such thing as quarterly review. The mission of the IMF is coming every quarter and looking at every register, every book of the government. It all started in 1988. When Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, the first lady Prime Minister of Pakistan, when she became the Prime Minister, she came along with an IMF program of $195 million and another $382 million in the shape of a structural adjustment facility on December 28, 1988. And now onward, conditions and performance criteria and then review of the mission, whether you are doing a good job or you are not doing a good job, came into existence. In 93 again, Pakistan again went to the IMF and reached an agreement to get a standby of $88 million, another loan in 1994, another loan in 1995. So these are the sequence which I have listed here. Next. 2 loans were given to Pakistan by the IMF amounting to $265 and $114 million in 1997. Then came, here is another structural change taking place between Pakistan's relationship with the IMF after 2008. Between 2004 and 2008, when President Musharraf was president of Pakistan, we were not under the IMF program. So since 1988 and until as we speak today, which is about 34 years, we have been under the IMF program, barring 4 years of President Musharraf between 2004 to 2008. Now, why I'm saying that there is a major change here? Because look at the size of the loan. $114 million, $265 million, and all of a sudden in 2008, the scale of the lending reached new height, and on December 2008, Pakistan signed an agreement of $7.6 billion. $7.6 billion. And then the government which came in 2013 again went to the IMF for a $6.6 billion. And in 2018, the current the Prime Minister Imran Khan, who has been ousted 2 months ago, he also went to the IMF, and this is the 22nd time that he went for a $6 billion. So far, $3 billion has been disbursed. But how much it has damaged Pakistan, I will come in a moment to explain to you. So this is the new government which came 2 months ago is continuing with this 22nd IMF program. 3 billion has been disbursed, 3 billion is yet to be disbursed, and the tenure of the program is going to expire on September 2022. In other words, in next 3 months' time, the schedule of the program is going to end. So altogether, Pakistan went to the IMF for 22 times in 61 years. 22 times in 61 years. This is like a patient going to the doctor for 61 years, 22nd time, and yet his or her health has never improved. In fact, it has deteriorated. Even in a normal circumstances, when you are sick and you are seeing a doctor, and if you don't see any improvement in your health, you change the doctor. The new doctor will change the medicine also. This is a normal practice. But here you can see that in 61 years, for 22 times, same medicine, same doctor. And illness is deteriorating. It is not improving. Next. This is the list of the program. I just wanted to put you everything which I just explained is given in a tabular form. Next. This is basically Pakistan's history of borrowing from the IMF. We have two parties who always ruled, and now we have a third party, political party, the PTI. So the dictators, means the military, borrowed 18% from the IMF. The two political parties borrowed 82%. So it is the democratic government. It is the democratic government who went to the IMF time and again, and during their time, the economy worsened. That is why I am of the opinion that this new liberal economic order has damaged democracies in developing countries. Let me repeat, the new liberal economic order as we practice today has damaged democracy and democratic institutions in developing countries. And today, in reaction, we are witnessing socialists and communists are coming into power. And I think in Brazil or in some Latin American countries, the left-oriented party have come to the power. So there is a need to rethink the new liberal order, economic order, or liberal economic thought, or Washington consensus, that whether this is working, whether this is damaging the democracies in developing countries, whether this is promoting dictatorship, bringing left-oriented government into power. This is all of us, particularly your is basically meant for South Asian Democratic Forum. And this is incumbent upon you to analyze this issue in South Asia, whether this new liberal economic order is working, whether it is damaging the democracies and promoting the dictatorship, or promoting the bringing left-oriented parties in the government. This is a food for thought for your own institution, South Asia Democratic Forum. Next. Who went to the IMF more? When it comes to securing loan from the IMF, the Pakistan People's Party is found to have far ahead in the game and having successfully borrowed from the IMF 10 times. 10 times. Look at the black represents the People's Party. The other is dictatorship. And the PMLN is on the green side. So if you add these green and black, these are democratic era of Pakistan. And it is the democratic government who went time and again to the IMF, not the dictator. Why? Because when dictator comes to the power, their ministers are not elected. They can take tough decisions. They are the educated people. They have been brought by dictator for a certain purpose to improve the economy. And unlike the democratic institutions, since they are elected by the people, they will never try to take a difficult decision because they think that they will lose vote. So things deteriorate further in terms of economic performance. And you will see in a moment when I show to you that how much debt we have accumulated during the green and the yellow part. Next. Look at this. Look at the red, 2.5 billion. And look at the green and the red, about $13 billion. 2 versus 13. Because they do not take difficult decisions, unpopular decisions, and things continue to deteriorate. Dictator has nothing to do with this kind of a populist type of policies. They have come for a certain purpose to improve the economy, improve the life of the people, improve the businesses, improve the industry. And that is why economic progress you will see during the dictator regime, at least in the case of Pakistan, has outperformed the democracies. Next. Now, this is very important to understand. How the IMF prescription damaged the economy. How? And I will explain in a very layman language. There were 4 policies: tight monetary policy, tight fiscal policy, market-based exchange rate, and raising utility prices. And I will explain each of them in a very plain language. Take tight monetary policy. What are the implications of this in developing countries like Pakistan? When you tighten the monetary policy, you raise interest rate. And we have learned from the economics that higher interest rate discourages private sector investment. When private sector investment is slowing down, it slows economic activity, means low economic growth. Low economic growth means less job creation, rise in unemployment and poverty. On the budget side, when interest rate is high, the government borrows from the commercial banks to finance fiscal deficit at a higher interest rate, which leads to higher interest payment in the budget. So bulk of the revenue which the government collects goes for interest payment, and very little are left for social development and physical infrastructure development. So the country's social infrastructure and physical infrastructure all suffer because of the high interest rate regime. And it leads to rise in the budget deficit. When budget deficit is high, you borrow more to finance fiscal deficit, therefore you accumulate more debt. Next, tight fiscal policy means we have seen in tight monetary policy that it increases the interest rate, which affects private sector investment. But in tight fiscal policy, because it says austerity, it cuts government expenditure. So through tight monetary policy, you discourage private sector investment, and through tight fiscal policy, you discourage government to invest more. So when neither the government nor the public sector are investing or spending, why do you expect economy to revive? And therefore, economic growth continues to remain at low level, will create less jobs, more unemployment, and more poverty, and more social unrest. Remember the case of Egypt, Tahrir Square. Next, market-based exchange rate. Implication: when you devalue your currency, by definition, it is inflationary. And very interesting, on the one hand, under the IMF program, or Washington consensus, you pursue tight monetary policy to curtail inflation. On the other hand, on the same policies, you pursue a market-based exchange rate means devaluation, which is inflationary in nature. So on the one hand, you create inflation, and the other hand, you raise discount rate to curtail inflation. Is it not contradiction? The same government, through devaluation, creating inflation, and the same government, through the central bank, tightening monetary policy, raising discount rate to control inflation. Contradictory. So, in a developing country like Pakistan, whenever devaluation takes place, it raises the cost of all imported inputs. In our export-oriented industry in general, and overall industry in particular, over 60% inputs are imported. We import raw material, we import capital goods, we import machinery, we import energy, we import food. So when you devalue, the landed cost of all these imported inputs will go up, which will increase your cost of production. You will lose competitiveness in international market. And the economic theory or the new liberal economic order will tell you that to gain competitiveness in international market, your exchange rate be right. So further devalue the currency, and the chain goes on and on and on. Similarly, in the case of Pakistan, 1 rupee devaluation will add to public debt by $90 billion without borrowing a single dollar. Our external public debt is $90 billion. If you devalue 1 rupee, in rupee term, it adds to your public debt by $90 billion, 90 billion rupees. So it adds to your debt without borrowing a single dollar. An increase in public debt means increase in interest payment, increase in current expenditure, increase in total expenditure, and then it further leads to rise in the budget deficit. Again, you borrow, and then you are in the same debt trap. So one of the criticism of the IMF program is that it creates debt trap. And this is what we are witnessing today in Pakistan. Next. Now, I have calculated the cost that we have incurred so far under the IMF program, and this is the phase 1, because we started IMF program. This government came into power in August. So from July 2018 to March 2020, what happened in 21 months' time only by implementing IMF program? So under the current IMF program, the central bank raised interest rate from 6.5% in June 2018 to 13.25% in July 2019 and kept at 13.25 until February 2020. This one policy added to the interest payment by rupees 1,687 billion. And on devaluation side, our exchange rate was 121 per dollar in June 2018. And by March 2020, it was 166 rupees per dollar. As I stated, 1 rupee devaluation add to 90 billion to public debt. This is the amount of debt that we added, 4,666 billion. So these two policies alone added 6,354 billion or $40 billion. Just for the sake of $6 billion IMF program, we have added in 21 months some $40 billion cost to the economy in terms of increase in debt and increase in interest payment. Next, phase 2, May 2nd and until October, November. Again, exchange rate was 152 rupees per dollar on May 2nd, and then exchange rate jumped to 174.6 per dollar, means that we lost 22 rupees per dollar in just few months from May to end of October. Means in 4 or 5 months, we lost 22 rupees per dollar. It added 1980 billion rupees in public debt without borrowing a single dollar. So far, until October-November 2021, the current IMF program costed $52 billion in terms of debt and interest payment against a disbursement of only $3 billion. Only $3 billion. Imagine $52 billion lost for $3 billion disbursement. Next. This is to be noted here. We have a decade of 90s. And Peter knows very well Dr. Ishrat Hussain. He described the decade of 90s as a lost decade for Pakistan. Why? Because in this decade, we added $17.4 billion of debt. We added. The decade of 2008 to 18, which I describe as a second lost decade for Pakistan. And in this decade, we added almost $50 billion to debt. Now, add these two decades, we have added $66 billion out of, in other words, over 70% of our total debt outstanding, external debt outstanding, has been added in these 2 decades. In our 7.5 decades of existence, over 70% of our debt has been added in these 2 decades. And that is why we call it lost decade. And there was one thing in common, that in both the decades we were under the IMF program. Can we afford yet another lost decade? Next. Will there be 23rd IMF program? The answer is absolutely yes. Because every time when the IMF programs end, a condition is being created in the country. A condition is being created. And today we are creating condition to build a case for 23rd IMF program. So the answer is absolutely yes. So we are heading towards yet another lost decade. Yet another lost decade. Third lost decade. Next. Let me conclude. New liberal economic order has seriously damaged Pakistan's economy, as well as economies of many developing countries like Argentina, Egypt, Ukraine, Chile, and I can go on and on. Washington Consensus represents a new liberal economic order today, where the IMF is the key player. This order is implemented in targeted countries through the so-called structural adjustment program, which I have just explained. This program is not meant to improve the member country's economy. Otherwise, our economy would have been very healthy, because this is the 22nd time that we have went to the IMF. Since we are becoming weaker and weaker, and that is why we are going back to the IMF. we have become addicted to the IMF. Our dependency has been created on the IFIs. So if somebody asks me, what is the outcome of the IMF program, in a very simple language, debt and poverty. Debt and poverty. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Khan, for your excellent presentation and your views on IMF-Pakistan relations, which are really eye-opening. And I really enjoyed your presentation, and there were many new aspects which we really need to discover, which are not only important for Pakistan but also extremely important for other countries. From there, your lecture was excellent and should be a case study for many scholars working around the globe. I would love to hand over the words to Dr. Zingel to share his views with us. And Dr. Zingel, please, the word is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it would be not a good discussion if I wouldn't have a different view. It's not exactly that I would contradict what you were saying, but I want to emphasize maybe in this connection the political economy side of it. Let me start with a personal note. When I joined the institute, I worked for the ministry, and that was during the time of the Bangladesh war, even before. And I was responsible for our contacts to the interministerial working group between the different German ministries that had to work on the crisis. A lot of insights, and I had unlimited access to all original material. By that time, I did not know that I would have loved to make more notes. Now, the interesting thing was, once the fall of Dhaka and the independence of Bangladesh, the international community was most concerned about the question who is to pay for the debt that might attribute to one or the other half of the countries. And it was my work to work it out. So I got an endless list of projects and tried to sort them out, east, west, center, which more or less, came to the same results as everybody else. Yeah, the eastern part of Pakistan got a smaller share of it. That comes to the political question. Yeah. Authoritarian governments have certain powers that a democratic government usually does not have. And it can be used in all ways. So in the case of Pakistan, a military government that lasted from 1958 to 1971, totally insensible to the problems of the eastern wings. Most of them had never been there, and if they had been there only shortly, led to a policy that in the final end led to the partition of the country, to the secession of Bangladesh. If you go to Pakistani textbooks, you find almost no mentioning of it, for understandable reasons. So it was, the democratically elected government that came in had to sort out problems that were not their own making. And very much on that line, I was part of a larger project where we studied the success or not success of development dictatorships. So we had case studies all over the world with other authoritarian governments, and we had examples where it worked excellently. Singapore at that time was a parade example. Yeah, worked very well. and quite a number of countries that had authoritarian governments and a terrible economic performance. So I think to make responsible one or the other, say, I mean, a more authoritarian government will lead to better results. It can lead, but not necessarily has to lead. And so on the basis of this experience, we took up a major research project together with PIDE and the economics department of Quaid-e-Azam University on the possibilities and implications and the role of self-reliance in Pakistan. And we ran an econometric model. We were very proud of it. But unfortunately, by the time we came out of it with the results, absolutely nobody was interested in it. What happened? The Russians came to Afghanistan, by the way, on the invitation of the government of Afghanistan of the time. Yeah. And there it was the so-called Russian war in Afghanistan. Pakistan was flush with money coming mainly from the United States. And if you look into history, yeah, there is often said that military governments in Pakistan came because of the United States. Not. But it happened usually that when real problems arose like that, there were military governments. Yeah. I think the thing was historically more a coincidence. Yeah. So authoritarian governments or dictatorships, obviously in Pakistan, had more access to American money. And some of the aid, especially the military and defense aid, I think is not very well documented. It's not really part of many statistics. Even defense imports not necessarily enter the statistics yearbooks. So if you take all the examples, you can find that democratically elected governments very often had to sort out things after the military governments were gone. And right from the beginning, to take an example of 1988. In 1988, the Geneva Accord, and the Americans agreed with the Russians that both of them would reduce their presence in the area. So the Americans did not really leave Pakistan alone. It was part of the agreement. The Americans missed the chance to support the first democratically government. What you had a democratically government coming after a military dictatorship, and what ended was American assistance. So these are typical situations where then the democratically government, which had not so much access to US defense means, to turn to the IMF. And the list could be much longer. In 2000, yeah, after the nuclear tests, I mean, Pakistan fared much worse than India because India themselves already had weaned themselves off most of development aid, so they could not be punished by the United States. Pakistan was saved in the Paris meeting because they said we cannot let Pakistan go to the wall. Soon afterwards, 9/11, again at the time of a military dictatorship, out of a sudden Pakistan was in a good book. And if you go into Pakistan history, you can see that the lowest level of sympathy for the United States and the praise sometimes were only a few weeks away. In 1977, in November, the American embassy was torched. And from end of December, Pakistan was one of the greatest ally. So I think there is a political side to it, as at present. The question whether, as Dawn today says, Lifeline IMF deal secured, it's obviously not documented, not signed, but it seems to be clear. Despite the fact that Pakistan is not supporting the United States and the Ukraine discussion at the United Nations. Yeah, the Americans are ready to give the IMF the necessary go along that they can contact us. So I could continue like this, and I don't want to bore the participants. The question is, when I was in Pakistan, always, I found that the country had excellent economists. Yeah, more or less frustrated. Yeah, because the resident representatives of the various institutions and embassies, yeah, sometimes exerted more micromanagement influence than the Pakistan economists, yeah, which certainly must be frustrating. And the Pakistan economic policy could be subsumized as, I would say, a naive understanding of economics. Yeah. Take the example imports control. I think you also have written that there are many ways to control imports. Yeah. So if I have a naive understanding, I said imports bad, like the Sri Lankan government had the bright idea to ban all imports of fertilizer. Yeah. Now they have a serious agricultural crisis. Yeah. So one could be very selective. Now, when I was asked to participate in this discussion, there was also the question whether CPEC and the Chinese would play a role in it. I think you didn't mention them, and I found that the budget speech, there's only one short mentioning of China. But here it is, if Pakistan has this enormous import surplus, yeah, in this extraordinary, export problems, and it has a free trade agreement with its biggest neighbors, then of course you could think, has the enormous increase of import to do with this free trade agreement? Yeah. And do people politically influential people think that the Chinese would not understand if Pakistan would say we have to limit our imports on certain grounds? I think the Chinese are would be very understanding. I don't know whether the Pakistan government ever tried anything like that. Yeah. So the political side of it, yeah, you have new governments coming in. In Germany, you say the time horizon of a politician is the next election. Yeah. So it is not the economy, yeah, that is supported by this kind of policy. They are supporting those people who are in power and want to remain in power, and that not necessarily has the same interests as the common man. And finally, this bipolar thinking of this dualism of private government, yeah, obviously has developed by economic teachers who think they have very stupid students and have to distinguish. Now there's an enormous sector in between, like foundations, yeah, religious groups, cooperatives, and so on. For example, the whole social sector in Germany falls under that, maybe 1/3 of the whole economy. Yeah. And privatization very often means that you turn a government undertaking into a private company. I mean, a private company in the legal sense, still owned by government. Yeah, to give them more freedom in their business decisions, and by the way, also higher salaries for the top managers. Yeah, so I think this distinction between private and government is not very helpful. One has to differentiate at a much earlier stage, and to show that many private organizations act almost like government, and on the other hand, government runs services, and so I think these things have to be borne in mind. And maybe I I stop for the moment to get to so people can ask questions and you can respond.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zingel. Before I see already we have first questions coming in, but before I open the floor for our Q&A session, I was wondering if Professor Hahn want to respond to your remarks, and then I would then open for the round for questions.
Yes, thank you, Peter. You narrated the whole story of Pakistan very well. I have only 2 points to respond. One, you said that more aid flows during the dictatorship in Pakistan. This is a myth. This is a myth. Because I was Director General of the Debt Office of the Ministry of Finance for 6 years. And 5 years, I was economic advisor and a special secretary. And I always tried to find out the flow of financial flows during the dictatorship and during the democratic government, and I found other way around. I gave you the number that during the dictatorship, the IMF loan never went more than $1 billion. That was the maximum. Mostly it used to be $200 million, $80 million, $300 million. But when Zardari came to power in 2008, it jumped to $7.6 billion. Imagine $200 and $300 million to $7.6 billion. And then during the PML regime came $6 billion. And now during the Imran Khan period, again $6 billion. So we are talking about billions during the democratic period, and rather in the millions during the dictatorship. So that is the difference. Yes, many foreign direct investment flows enormously during the dictatorship. I'm talking about President Musharraf period, because I was at the helm of affairs in the government. And I could see that in 2007, we received $8.5 billion in foreign investment, which was 6% of our GDP. We never thought in that line during that period. But I just wanted to clarify this. The second point, you said that Pakistan was in a good book of the United States when after 9/11 and others. You see, this is the problem with US-Pakistan relationship. And in every forum, the Pakistani authorities have mentioned this to their counterpart in the United States, that the United States has always maintained a transactional relationship with Pakistan. If you do this, $250 million. If you do this, $150 million. Oh, you're not doing with this well, we will not release the amount of money. This is not a sovereign to sovereign relationship. This was a transactional relationship. And we always complain to the United States that, this is not the way the two government maintains its relationship. So I just wanted to clarify that. And you also mentioned that in the budget speech of the current finance minister, China was mentioned only once. This is the politics. This is the political economy which you were explaining to us. The government in power today will never use more than once in the budget speech the word China. Although Chinese always came forward to bail Pakistan out. Yes, today you have seen in the newspaper the $2.3 billion loan was agreed by the Chinese commercial banks. And they will never do this unless and until they were given a nod from the Chinese leadership. So it is China who always came forward to help Pakistan. But because of the political reasoning, we continue to frustrate China. let me admit that we frustrate China. As a policy, we frustrate China. But whenever we needed money, we go to China. And the Chinese have always helped us. I can give you many instances, but I don't want to waste time on this. So this is the 2-3 points which I wanted to clarify.
Just a short rejoinder to it. The inflow, I was not talking about IMF money. What I was saying that if Pakistan gets, for whatever reasons, generous American assistance, most probably also combined with advice, then the need to go to the IMF might be less. And if that kind of support is drying up, then IMF is something of a last resort, where especially civilian governments.
No, Peter. See, America has always avoided giving cash loan to Pakistan because they have to go through a long process of senator and congressional committees. In order to avoid that, they always ask the IMF that you lend the money, which is very easy to give this money to any country. So United States used IMF to lend money to Pakistan, avoiding the Congress and the Senate.
Professor Hahn, I might, when you don't mind, and Dr. Zingel, I will just use this opportunity to say a few words more. First of all, I have the pleasure to pass some words of appreciation by Paulo Casaca, who is the founder and director of SADF. He made some comments, but not everybody of us can read them. So if you don't mind, I will just pass them now to you. Paulo Casaca says, Professor Hahn is giving us a remarkable contemporary history lesson on the Bretton Woods construction. SADF is very proud to host such a session, and of course a big thank to Dr. Zingel too. Professor Hahn very pointedly emphasized the link of the Washington Consensus and the Chicago Friedman School of Thought, who became also an important element in the neoliberal club that had been shared by Hayek and very much identified with the Austrian School of Economics. Professor Hahn, as director of SADF, also talking about Paulo, let me express our full-heartedly thanks to your great contribution. May I tell you, however, that the issue you are raising regarding Pakistan could also be made universally, which I already also indicated. For instance, they are being made now in the United States and the European Union regarding the way to subdue inflation through high interest rates. In this context, he is raising a question. So Paul's question is, can I put, as you rightly mentioned, John Maynard Keynes was a crucial person on the Bretton Woods start. Can you see any way we could recover his line of thought to enter the present plights, just as a Pakistani regarding the IMF recipes? This is the question.
Can I answer this?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yes, of course. That is why I said to you that your institution, South Asian Democratic Foundation, SADF, is the right platform to analyze the impact of new liberal economic policies in South Asia in particular and developing countries in general. Is there any need? Is there any need to improve upon this? The answer is yes. We can. I'm not anti to the new liberal economic order because there are certain good things in that thinking or thoughts, but it has to be modified according to the region or according to the country. One shoe will never fit for all. This was meant for Latin American countries, but brutally implemented in all other developing countries. So the structure of the economies of Latin America and South Asia is different. So not one shoe will fit for all. So this is what I'm saying, that you are the right platform. You deal with South Asian democratic, because I believe that this new liberal economic order is hurting the democracies in developing countries. The government is under tremendous pressure because the type of policies that have been asked to implement a democratically elected government will be very hard pressed to do this thing. And if they do this under the pressure of the IMF, then there will be a problem for that country. And the people will revolt. And this is exactly happening in Latin American countries. Only 2 days ago, a left-oriented party came into the power. So are we doing service to the democracy, or we are killing democracies in developing countries? This is a question which and you are the right forum to do this. And whatever I can do, I will assist you with that. And I will be part of your discussion, part of your effort, whatever you want to do. Please count on me as well. I will be part of your. If you want to undertake a study on this, I will be happy to join you.
It will be a great pleasure, Professor Hahn. Dr. Zingel, I saw you are interested in a further comment.
Yeah, maybe, and you will not like what I say. Yeah, I mean, a dollar borrowed is a dollar. Yeah, if I go to a bank and say I want to have a credit in US dollars, what you can do in many countries. Yeah. And the German and the euro devaluates, what it presently does. Now we lost almost 10% during the last months, maybe 7-8% or so. Yeah. Now what I own to that country, in that currency, yeah, remains the same. So if I enter any such deals, I also have to take in mind that currency rates might change. Yeah. And for example, in the first years of the euro, yeah, the US dollar euro relationship fluctuated very widely. Now, what has happened in private and on the large scale, that with the easy money that we had during the last years, yeah, people went for short-term credits, hoping that a prolongation, the rolling over, would become even cheaper because interest rate would go down. Yeah. Now it's playing havoc with country, and obviously, and I was surprised to see that in Pakistan, any arrangement for more than 1 year is termed as long-term. What that means, if I read now that 90% of Pakistan's foreign debt is long-term, it simply means it can be over in 1 year and 1 day, because that would be longer. And if I read of this 37 or how many billion US dollar foreign debt Pakistan has, and that will mature within the next 12 months, yeah, then I only can explain that obviously most of this debt is very short-term. I mean, not short-term in the technical sense, but a year, a little bit, maybe 2 years. Yeah. So do you see how do you see the picture for Pakistan then? But with rising, these credits will have to be re-rolled, have to be refinanced, and much higher interest rates.
Well, Peter, we have about $127 billion of outstanding debt. $127 billion. The short-term debt, 1 year and less, is very minuscule. Very minuscule. It is less than $1.5 billion or $2 billion out of 137. Most of them are very long-term debt, particularly the Paris Club debt is about 30 years of debt. Similarly, World Bank debt is very cheap in terms of interest and very long duration. IMF loan is about today. It is about $7 billion outstanding, and the loan is about 0.75% interest. They call service charge, and its tenure is something like that. That when the program ends, after 22 months, this is the grace period, and after 22 months, then Pakistan will start repaying the debt, and that repayment is in such a way, it is designed in such a way that it will never affect any country's balance of payment. So
I was relating not to the IMF. I mean, I was relating to
I
Pakistan.
was talking about the Pakistan debt. I said we have a debt of $127 billion, all kinds of external debt and liabilities. Most of them are long-term debt. The short-term debt, as you are mentioning, 1 year and less, is very little, about $1.5 billion to $2 billion only.
Okay. So then, how can I understand what I found in the press is $73 billion coming up to be refinanced in the next 1 year?
No, don't take that seriously. Don't take that seriously. What they, I also read all these kinds of things. These are nonsense.
Okay. And then one question that we had when we were discussing this meeting beforehand, there was a rumor, obviously maybe not correct, that the IMF was interested in the terms of conditions of Chinese loans.
Yes. You see, from day one, let me quote, when we were discussing whether to go to the IMF or not, I will quote Mike Pompeo, the then Secretary of State of Donald Trump regime, and he said, and I quote, "Make no mistake, we will not allow IMF to lend money to Pakistan to repay Chinese debt." Right? So from day one, Chinese debt is basically the sore point. And under the IMF program, we were asked to give exact the loan, how much you owe to China. So we had to give them exact amount, that how much exact loan, number of loans, the details, and the amount. Only then the IMF agreed, and we had a program of $6 billion, which was agreed in in 1st of July 2019 under Imran Khan's regime. So Chinese debt is the main element because they think that this is a debt trap diplomacy of China.
Yeah.
So I don't buy all these things, because I know the relationship between China and the United States. So everything is fair in love and war.
And since you're such an insider, do you think there's some kind of a back channel between China and the US to discuss these things before going to the IMF?
No, but China has linked its assistance to Pakistan with the IMF program. As you rightly pointed out, that somebody has to take a guarantee that Pakistan will be able to repay the debt. You see, China has agreed now. It has been signed by the two governments. The money will be disbursed either today or tomorrow. China did not wait for IMF program to be finalized, and yet they agreed and they signed. They made a little bit difference from Saudis and others, because Saudi Arabia and UAE have directly linked this loan, their loan, with the IMF. But Chinese also said the same thing, but they moved ahead without signing of the two agreement between the IMF and the Pakistani authorities. But I also believe that our relationship between China is not as good as it used to be in the last 3-4 years. it is good, but it is not. As we always say that we are iron brothers, and our relationship is deeper than ocean and higher than the mountain. I think this is only related to books now.
Okay. Professor Hans, thank you very much for your final words, and so very interesting to follow. And I agree with you that we have really to follow up this issue between Pakistan and China relation in the context of Belt and Road and CPEC. I think there are a lot of things to discuss more and go in detail, in particular when it comes to the contracts, so that we can really cooperate in future. And it's a great pleasure to express my gratitude to Dr. Zingel and to you, Professor Hahn, that you participated in our today's webinar, and we are really looking forward to stay in touch with you and to collaborate in future. It would be a really great honor and pleasure to continue our discussion, and hope this is just a starting point for fruitful collaboration.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. And I'm grateful to Peter, who basically introduced me to you. And through Peter, now I'm talking to you and your audience. Please also convey my regards to Paulo Casaca, who is as you pointed out, founder of SADF. I'm really grateful for his whatever words very kind words he used for me and my presentation. I'm really grateful to him. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Dr. Zingel, you have a final word too, or otherwise we are looking forward to
But it was a pleasure, especially meeting Ashfaque and having the opportunity to exchange views, and hope we can see in person sooner or later.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much, and I wish you a good afternoon to Islamabad, and all my greetings to Heidelberg, Germany, and hopefully we will see us soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
So.